Don't buy the Sony ZV-E1. I'm going to tell you why, because even though it's a smaller camera with a lot of power, and yeah, it's the best camera for vloggers as I've seen across every single video that's come out, my thoughts are this. The Sony ZV-E1 is essentially an A7S III and an A7C body. Now, I shoot all on Sony equipment. I'm looking into an FX3. The camera that I would use for my top down is an A7 IV. I have another A7 IV. My main camera that I shoot with is an A1. And off camera back there, just chilling out, is an FX30. I have a lot of Sony cameras, and I typically buy just about every new camera that comes out. And so initially my thoughts were, hey, this idea of a smaller, compact, video-centric camera sounds great, and I'm gonna be all about it. Until I looked at the pictures of this camera and realized everything that the A7C wasn't for me is what the ZV-E1 won't be for me either. If compact size is all you're going for, decreasing the footprint as much as possible on your camera, then perhaps the ZV-E1 is for you, or even the A7C is for you, because they're both full frame cameras. They bring the features of a full frame camera that typically has a bigger body into a smaller body, but in that smaller body comes a lack of features that make these cameras extremely useful. There's only so small that we can make cameras. If you remember the first A7S camera, it was small, it was hard to hold on to, and the size of their full frame cameras are significantly larger these days because of the need for more control. So when the A7C came out, I was super excited because full frame, small body, this is gonna be the camera that I take with me everywhere. Travels with me, it's gonna be just so much easier to use this smaller camera. But there were downfalls to that camera. The lack of buttons on the camera made it harder for me to get adjustments made. I shoot in manual mode, and so adjusting shutter speed, aperture, and ISO was just not as intuitive as having a traditional full frame camera that has enough buttons to control all of those things easily. Yes, I know I can remap buttons and make it work, but the lack of buttons meant sacrificing something so that I can get the control that I wanted. So the A7C became my top-down camera, which I never used for anything else. And occasionally I would run back to it. My problem is I need a smaller camera body, and that's gonna be the key to me shooting more content and getting out there, capturing more photos and all that stuff. It's a smaller camera body with the features that I need, but it wasn't. And there are other downfalls of the A7C as well, just as far as the body design itself, I didn't find as comfortable as a slightly larger camera. When I'm hand-holding it, of course, if you're not hand-holding and you're using like a vlogging setup, you know, you're not really hand-holding the camera, you do want a lighter camera. I didn't like the SD card door, even the weather stripping or whatever, the seal that went around the SD card, a door started kind of falling off. Keep in mind, like, my A7C barely saw the light of day. It was used in a studio all the time, and I opened and closed the door often, but that quickly wore out and that seal was gone, or almost gone. It was starting to flake off, and that all happened without even needing to expose the camera to the elements. Looking at the ZV-E1, same body design, same door, same sealing mechanism there. And I'm looking at the body just thinking like, man, I'm not gonna get the longevity out of that camera that I would if I went with a slightly more expensive camera, or what we now call a traditional full frame style camera. I'm looking at the ZV-E1 as it is right now, and I'm thinking to myself like, yeah, would a smaller camera body result in me vlogging more? No, it wouldn't. Yes, it's a little bit lighter, but the controls would get in my way. The lack of controls would add friction to my workflow because I shoot with other cameras. Now, if you're a person who has zero experience with a full frame camera that has these controls, like a Sony a7 IV, a Sony a7S III, or the Canon or Nikon or Fuji equivalents, whatever, that have the controls, then it probably doesn't matter because you're not moving backwards to get a lighter camera body. I was moving backwards to go to the A7C, and that introduced friction into my workflow, thus making me not want to take the A7C with me anywhere, and I would resort back to carrying my A1 or carrying my A7 IV, or, you know, whatever full frame camera that I happened to be using at the time that was in a more standard full frame body with the controls I wanted. So now looking at the ZV-E1, knowing that I would want to shoot in manual mode, knowing that I would want easy control of my aperture, shutter, and ISO in a way that was extremely consistent with my other cameras, and then also still having the same control with the other buttons, I wouldn't get that, and I know that there would be friction that would be added into the system. Now, why hasn't Sony and Canon and all the other manufacturers been able to say, hey, if you want video, go to our cinema line? You know, why does the FX line of cameras for Sony exist with almost all the same features as what they're putting in more traditional photography style camera bodies like the A7 line of cameras? I have an FX3, and often my FX3 is frustrating to use because I'm just not familiar with it in the way that I'm familiar with my A7 IV. And so I'll grab my A7 IV if I need something that is not going to provide any friction to me creating content, because my A7 IV is easy to use. It doesn't get in the way of me creating content. I never went and grabbed my A7C because the lack of buttons meant I had to go into menus, and it meant I had to take extra steps to control features that were much easier to control on my A7 IV. Thus, I never used the A7C. And now I'm thankful that I'm deciding and telling myself the same result would likely happen with the ZV-E1. And I know that that will happen with a lot of people who are thinking lighter is the key to me shooting more content. And so I'm making this video not because I think that this is a bad camera. I think Sony is still pushing the envelope further. And for anybody who is wanting to make the jump from, say, an A6000 line of camera, where maybe they're still shooting in HD only, or they're shooting in 4K 30, and they want access to 4K 60 and access to 4K 120, and they want a better range of ISO so that they can get lower light footage that looks good. This camera would be a logical next step for them. Going from the A6000 line to a full frame video camera, a centric camera, the ZV-E1 would be that next step. Who it's not a likely next step for is someone who has experience with a full frame Sony camera like the A7 line of cameras, not the A7C, but the A7 IV, A7 III, the A7R lines, or the A1 or the A9, any of those full frame cameras that have the full controls on them. This would be a step backwards in your workflow and would likely introduce frustration to your natural filming style without you having to adapt. Not that we're unable to adapt. I could totally adapt and make the A7C work. I could totally adapt and make the ZV-E1 work. But when it comes to making fast decisions to capture content, whether it be for a client and you're filming something that might only happen once and you want to get that natural result that's taking place, or even for yourself in a vlogging environment where you want to respond to whatever is taking place in your life, you need a camera that provides the least amount of friction possible. And in my opinion, you can only step forward, which means only inviting things into your workflow that reduce the amount of friction. So who is the ZV-E1 good for? Well, the ZV-E1 is great for somebody who has been shooting on an A6000 line or a point and shoot camera like an RX100 or something like that, and they know that they want to take their content to the next level. They aren't happy with the low light performance that their current camera gets, and they don't want to jump all the way up to a full A7 line of camera because maybe it's the cost, maybe the size is something that is a friction measure. But moving up to full frame is a decrease in friction because of the improvements they're going to get. And there's no lack of buttons. The A6000 line of camera, the point and shoot cameras are lacking the same buttons and controls as the ZV-E1 is. And so because of that, the ZV-E1 really is an upgrade to what they're currently using. The ZV-E1 is not good for somebody who has a full frame camera already. Perhaps it's the A7 III, A7 IV, the A7S III, maybe even the A7S II, or one of those other full frame cameras, and are in the mindset that a smaller camera means it's more portable and I will get out and shoot more. That mindset is not who this camera is for, and you will likely fall into the same pits that I have fallen into in my chase to get the most powerful camera in the smallest package available. If I'm not willing to carry my A7 IV with me everywhere I go with the lens that I need, I'm not going to be willing to carry a ZV-E1 with the lens that I need either. It's not that much smaller of a package that it's going to make that big of a difference. The things that I'm going to lose out on as far as camera controls and as far as inputs, having multiple SD card slots and all of those additional things, the trade-offs are not going to make that big of a difference. And so it really is a mindset. If I have friction in my life that prevents me from creating the content, it's not the camera, it's not the device that I'm using, it is myself. It's me that truly needs to get out of the way and recognize that I have the equipment that I need. Even an iPhone is sufficient to create content. If I'm not creating content with my iPhone, I'm not going to create content with the ZV-E1. If I have an A7S3, an FX3, an A1, whatever, and I think that the limiting factor is that those cameras are too big and too much to carry around, the ZV-E1 is not going to solve that problem. That is a problem that I need to deal with internally and get over the fact that gear is not in the way, it is me that's in the way. So should you buy the ZV-E1? I think I made it clear. If it is a clear upgrade to what you are currently using, and the only limiting factors that you have right now is that your camera is in the way of you creating the content, and it's not you, I want to make that clear, because it can be you, just like I know it is me most of the time that is in the way of creating the content that I want to create. If you can clearly define that the camera is the limiting factor, which means you're shooting in the evenings and you're not getting the clarity in the footage that you want. You can't boost the ISO high enough without your image quality falling apart. You are running into issues with lenses. You're vlogging with these super ultra wide lenses because you're using a crop sensor camera and you want that full frame look so that you can get more of a native focal length out of your lenses. Those are realistic reasons to get a full frame camera. Those are things that are not internal. Those are external limiting factors that I know if I get the ZV-E1, it will improve my content. That is who the ZV-E1 is for. So as far as a camera goes, I think it's a great camera. Yeah, there are little things that I don't agree with the body and the design. I really wish it wasn't essentially an A7S3 version of the A7C. Maybe they should have called it the A7CS and it would have made a little bit more sense. But I think it is a valid step up when you are coming from a camera that provides less than what that camera provides. The killer features of this camera are not what it's able to achieve because we've had those things in cameras for a few years now. The A7S3 does all of those things while giving you more controllability and more functionality in the camera body. So it's not giving us anything that we couldn't have gotten already other than a smaller form factor. And so if smaller form factor and the upgrades that you would get from moving to the ZV-E1 outweigh what you had before and you don't need anything more, then it's a great option for you. So even though I started out this video saying don't buy it, the real truth is don't buy it if your limiting factors are internal. Don't buy it if you think it's going to be the piece of kit that gets you out and films more content. Don't buy it unless it is a clear add of value to your existing workflow and you can clearly identify the pain points that it solves for you. I've got links to the camera down below should you decide to pick one of those up. Check out those links down below. It helps support the channel when you click on them and I appreciate it. That's going to do it for this video. Thumbs up if you agreed with me and subscribe to the channel so you can get videos when I put them out. Take care.